Good evening. How you doing? It's Friday night, and it occurred to me that there are a lot of things that I do, or that I want to do, that are kind of boring. Sort of. Somewhat. To an extent. To an extent, they are boring. And maybe they wouldn't be boring, or rather, I could harness that boredom, use doing a live stream as a forcing function, and harness that boredom into what's essentially an ASMR video. Whereby I also do something that I want to do, and it makes it a win-win. I mean, it could be a win-lose, but it's a win for me. It's a win-win for everybody. Yeah, you don't have to be here. Nobody's forcing you to be here if you don't want to be here. So tonight, one of the things that I want to do is not jump back into, but sort of go back into some of the, holes in the philosophical reading or studying, or whatever you want to call it, that I've been doing. And the haircut, hi, those of you who are dropping by. The haircut is a whim. I wanted to just shave it all, but then I lost my nerve. And what I ended up is this vaguely Proud Boy looking thing.
There's a lot of things that I love about Hitler.
Maybe I could use it to infiltrate some far-right gatherings. I might pass as one of them. Anyway, joking aside, one of the philosophers that I've never read, but I've never read directly. I've read excerpts from, and you read. There are a lot of compilations of philosophy texts where you'll get bits and pieces from a bunch of different philosophers. Obviously, you want to go to the source, and their far and few. Oh, well, good. Good. I did it at one point in my... An idea floating around in my head when I moved to DC was, perhaps it would be a good idea if I joined the RNC or, went to various right-wing fundraisers masquerading as a right-wing activist, and just see how embedded I could get, and then see what sort of, chaos I could cause from within. But I just don't think I would be able to keep up the facade for very long, if at all. Of course, I did always have like that little dream in the back of my head. Ooh, maybe they welcome me with open arms. Maybe I get close to the orange man himself. Then what sort of mischief? What sort of mischief could I cause? What sort of mischief should I cause? Like, perhaps...
My dog stepped on a bee.
You never know, right? All kinds of stuff could happen. Anyway, so I have my mild liner. I have my little mini Post-it pad, and I have my Papermate flare-tipped pen. These things are, I mean, it's a necessity. I have a box of them sitting right over here. And you all, or those of you who choose to, can use this video to fall asleep and or learn a little bit about Ludwig Wittgenstein. So he's one of the philosophers that I've just never first sourced him, really. And I wanted to start doing that. And one way to start doing that, I figured, was, as I said, to use a video as a forcing function. So that's what I'm doing here. That's what you all are lucky enough to be along for the ride as I read and talk to myself. 'Cause I don't know if when you read, perhaps you talk to yourself as you take notes. Depending on what you're reading, obviously, I'm not suggesting that, there's a need to talk to yourself when you're reading most novels, unless it's, somebody like David Foster Wallace or Cormac McCarthy, who Stellar Maris just came out. And I've been reading that. And definitely it's given me pause, at different times. But anyway, Wittgenstein has put out, or I think his major works, he's only had a couple, and Philosophical Investigations is one of them. I'm going to read it. And it's separated, like a lot of philosophy texts, into sort of numbered ideas. They're not like aphorisms. It's not quite that succinct or self-contained. But I like it when things are ordered this way. In a pinch, you could just turn to any page and read one of them, and they might stand up on its own. For instance, I just opened up to number 255, and it's a single line. The philosopher treats a question like an illness. Okay. We don't have the context for that. But maybe could be interesting. Let's get there. I'm not going to get there tonight, that's for sure. But could get somewhere. So Wittgenstein was into linguistics and the idea of how language was developed and to what end it was developed and how much of it is like a uniquely human construct and what the forces were sort of molding it. He was obviously like a predecessor to Noam Chomsky and his ilk, right? And Chomsky doesn't have like a really favorable view of Wittgenstein in retrospect, but I think it's important to know how we got to where we got. So there's a chance I could abandon this text halfway through. I doubt it. I think I'll go all the way through it. Because I don't like having books sitting on my bookshelf for any length of time and then have someone be like, oh, wow. The Michael Scott quote of, have I read it? I own it. But no, I haven't read it. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to skip the preface. So this is actually, in the original German and then translated page by page. So the German is on the left side, the English is on the right side. Now, I'm a little amazed by that because it seems to stay in sync. For instance, even, by the time we get to entry 349, like 349 is the same on the other side. German is generally, at least in like my experience with localization and translation, longer than English. So I have to think that perhaps, maybe there are some spacers put in here that I'm not seeing. But yeah, it's a one-to-one mapping on each page, all the way to the end. So either that informed the way that they translated, which I think that would be pretty irresponsible, or they did something else in order to keep them in sync like this. So yeah, that's really of no interest or use to you, the watcher slash listener. Why is this Tony? Is this because of his views on foreign politics? His radical non-interventionist policies. I'm sort of into them. So I could see where, here's the thing, like there's got to be some level, so I'm trying to be as delicate about this as possible, but there has to be some level of, a lot of people my age and younger, or particularly younger, it's very easy to get caught up in the now. Whereas once we reach the age of someone like Noam, yes, maybe he has some degenerative white matter disease. Maybe the logical functioning of his brain is not what it once was. Maybe. Cormac McCarthy is 92, I think, right? And read Stella Maris and The Passenger and tell me that mind is diminished, and I will... Well, I'll just say I disagree with you, but I think you get my point. So I do think that there's like the ship turning around slowly, right, in the canal versus the let's say the cargo ship turning around versus the speedboat turning around, right? But I'm still a fan of Noam Chomsky. Regardless, Noam was not a fan necessarily of Wittgenstein. All right, so this Philosophical Investigations opens with a passage in Latin, which I will try to stumble. Sure, we can say, what was it? Parentes, dismantling empire. Yeah, I don't know if that's fair. Like, Michael Parenti did not develop a philosophy about language, like I guess if you're talking about politically, then maybe, yeah. But if you're talking about linguistically, which is where I'm sort of talking about it, where it's applicable here, when we're talking about Wittgenstein and mentioning Chomsky in relation to Wittgenstein, I don't see where Michael Parenti enters that conversation. No, this is exactly why. Like, okay, yeah, he's cooler. All right, whatever. Right. I think manufacturing consent will be, Michael Parenti is an important political leftist, certainly. I just think Noam Chomsky is more than that. And not as good, certainly not as good at, I don't want to get into a discussion about who's better at tub thumping, right? Michael Parenti is a skilled tub thumper. Noam Chomsky is not. Anyway, the first paragraph of this here text, again, Wittgenstein, Philosophical Investigations. It's in Latin. I have not, it's been many, many years since I've taken Latin. Salvete amicus. Agricolae factum. E pluribus unum. But we'll see if we can get through it. It's relevant and refers to it. So, cum ipsi appellabant rem aliquium, et cum secundum eam vocum corpus ad aliquid movabant, videbam et tenebam hoc. Isn't tenebam tree? Isn't that what tenebam means? Tenebam hoc abis vocari rem illum, quod sanabat cum iam velant ostendere. Hoc, I do like how much you can kind of like read Latin and then just be like, oh yeah, it's just the English word with a different ending. Corporis tamquam verbis naturalibus omnium gentium quae fiant vultu et I'm butchering this, I apologize. Oculorum memborum actu et sonu vocus indicante affectionem anime impotendis habendis regiscendis fugiendisiv rebus ita verba in veris sentius locus sui passita et crebo audita quorum rerum signa essent politum collegibam mias quigem voluntas edimo and as signus ore per haec euntiabam. Augustine, Confessions 1:8. These words, it seems to me, let me make a mark where that starts. These words, it seems to me, give us a particular picture of the essence of human language. Great. I don't know what the words were. I know some of them. Tree was one of them. In this, the words in language name objects. Okay, so we're not, the actual particulars of it maybe aren't important. In this picture of language, we find the roots of the following idea. Every word has a meaning. This meaning is correlated with a word. It is the object for which the word stands. This is, I think, fairly basic. I actually think like Chomsky actually takes issue with this entire idea of words being things that stand in for objects, and not so much that they don't do that. Obviously, that is what words do, right? But the way that it was developed, it's one of the things that he takes issue with. Umbrage with, he would say. The meaning is correlated with the word. It's the object for which the word stands. Augustine does not mention any difference between kinds of words. Someone who describes the learning of language in this way is, I believe, thinking primarily of nouns. This makes sense. Like table, chair, bread, and people's names. So yeah, like that's got a point. It's a sexton. There's a Fallout bobblehead. There's a grabber mask. Down there is a Holy Grail, a chalice. Oh my God, I'm just noticing. I did not. Ooh, God, I'm going to have to clean that up. That looks like it's done by some sort of disease. Oh, is it referring to the pear tree? All right, good. I mean, I know German for tree is Tannenbaum, right, or a Christmas tree. Right. I know. I just noticed that just now. On this side, at least it's in shadow. But oh boy, don't look there. So yeah, here Augustine is talking about just assigning words to things, and only secondarily to the names of certain actions and properties, and of the remaining kinds of word as something that will take care of itself. Okay, that's interesting, I guess. Now I think of the following use of language. I've heard this. This is part of Wittgenstein I've heard before. I send someone shopping. I give him a slip of paper marked 5 red apples. He takes the slip to the shopkeeper, who opens the drawer marked apples. There's a footnote here that let's see, is it just one page of footnote? Yeah. The footnote is, when grown-ups named some object and the same time turned towards it, I perceived this, and I grasped that the thing was signified by the sound they uttered, since they meant to point it out. Look, this is anyone who has raised a child. You don't have to have raised a child to get this, right? This, however, I gathered from their gestures, the natural language of all people. The movements of the limbs, the tone of voice, indicates the affections of the soul when it desires or clings to or rejects or recoils from something. In this way, little by little, I learnt to understand what things the words which I heard uttered in their respective places in various sentences signified, and once I got my tongue around these signs, I used them to express my wishes. Okay, now think of the following use of language. I send someone shopping. Give him a slip of paper marked 5 red apples. He takes the slip to the shopkeeper, opens the drawer marked apples. Then he looks up the word red in a chart and finds the color sample next to it. Then he says the series of elementary number words. I assume that he knows them by heart, up to the number 5. And for each number word, he takes an apple of the same color as the sample out of the drawer. It is in this and similar ways that one operates with words. But how does he know where and how he is to look up the word red? And what is he to do with the word 5? Well, I assume that he acts as I have described. Explanations come to an end somewhere. It's always good to keep that in mind, right? We don't want to turn into a bunch of Jordan Petersons here, do we?
I believe that truth will save the world, so speak truth.
No. We don't. But what is the meaning of the word 5? No such thing was in the question here. Only how the word 5 is used. 2. That philosophical notion of meaning is at home in a primitive idea of the way language functions. But one might instead say that it's the idea of a language more primitive than ours. Gotta start somewhere as well as end somewhere, right? Let us imagine a language for which the description given by Augustine is right. The language is meant to serve for communication between builder A and assistant B. If I'm asking for a hex wrench, it's good to have a common. Dude, ain't gonna happen, Lone Wanderer. Not happening. Appreciate the constant repeated asks. Ask him. Okay, so let us imagine a language for which the description given by Augustine is right. The language is meant to serve for communication between builder A and assistant B. A is building with building stones. There are blocks, pillars, slabs, and beams. B has to pass him the stones, and to do so in the order for which A needs them. For this purpose, they make use of a language consisting of the words block, pillar, slab, beam. A calls them out. B brings the stone, which he has learnt to bring at such and such a call. Conceive of this as a primitive language. Now, this all seems extraordinarily simple, right? You have to have really, really firm foundation building blocks when you're creating a system like this. So, I'm bearing with it just as you may be or may not be. Augustine, we may say, does describe a system of communication, only not everything that we call language is this system. And one has to say in several cases where the question arises, will that description do or not? The answer is yes, it will, but only for this narrowly circumscribed area, not for the whole of what you're purporting to describe. Again, it sort of just makes common sense. It's as if someone were to say, playing a game consists in moving objects about a surface according to certain rules. And we reply, you seem to be thinking of board games, but they're not all the games that there are. You can rectify your explanation by expressly restricting it to those games. So, yeah, constructing a framework by which you can understand what's being said. Well, there you go. Yeah, well, somehow Californium still got in there. 4, imagine a script in which letters were used for sounds, but also for signs of emphasis and punctuation. A script can be conceived as a language for describing sound patterns. Okay, now imagine someone constructing that script as if there were just a correspondence of letters to sounds, and as if the letters did not also have completely different functions. Augustine's conception of language is like that of an oversimple conception of the script. 5. If one takes a look at the example in 1, one can perhaps get an idea of how much the general concept of the meaning of a word surrounds the working of language with a haze, which makes clear vision impossible. It disperses the fog we study, the phenomena of language in primitive kinds of use, in which one can clearly survey the purpose and functioning of the words. A child uses such primitive form of language when he learns to talk. Here, the teaching of language is not so much explaining as it is training. You could make the obvious connection there, right? Well, in fact, let me do that. And we can forgive Wittgenstein for not making the connection to, say, training data sets. 6, we could imagine that the language of 2 was the whole language of A and B, even the whole language of a tribe. The children are brought up to perform these actions, to use these words as they do so, and to react in this way to the words of others. So, yeah, so far, so good, I think. Anybody have any questions? Same, Cordamus. And yes, they are. And everybody wants to be famous, right? Even John California, who discovered Californium. 6, we could imagine that the language of 2 was the whole language of A and B. An important part of the training will consist in the teachers pointing to the objects, frog, directing the child's attention to them. You, child, this frog. And at the same time uttering a word, frog. For instance, the word slab. No, frog. As he displays that shape. Frog. Tree frog, really. We want to get specific. But now, all of a sudden, we're getting into like qualifiers, right? We're not there yet. We're not at qualifiers. I do not want to call this ostensive explanation or definition because the child cannot yet ask what the name is. I'll call it the ostensive teaching of words because, that's all that's being done here is we're associating a sound with a thing. Right? I say that it will form an important part of the training because it's so with human beings, not because it could not be imagined otherwise. Okay. So, the ostensive teaching of words can be said to establish an associative connection between the word and the thing. Frog. By the end of this lesson, I expect you all to know this is a frog. If, nothing else. But what does this mean? Well, it may mean various things, but one very likely thinks first that all that a picture of the object comes before the child's mind. And I do misread that. It may mean various things, but one very likely thinks first of all that a picture of the object comes before the child's mind when it hears the word. Okay, so frog, right? Remember that frog? Do you have object permanence? Have we reached object permanence yet? But now if this does happen, is that the purpose of the word? It may be the purpose. I can imagine such a use of words, sequences of sounds. Uttering a word is like striking a note on the keyboard of the imagination. It's kind of a little corny. Schopenhauer would not have written that. And Wittgenstein was quite critical of Schopenhauer. But from what I'm reading so far of Wittgenstein, his ideas may be great. You know what? Could be the translation, right? Cordymus, it may be very bad. You may need to see somebody. Frogs are not necessarily green. And that's a very important lesson to learn, especially if you live in the rainforest. Anyway, it may be the purpose. Okay. But in the language of number 2, it's not the purpose of the words to evoke images. It may, of course, be discovered that it helps to attain the actual purpose. But if this is the effect of the ostensive teaching, am I to say that it affects an understanding of the word? Doesn't someone who acts on the call slab/frog in such and such a way, don't they understand it? I mean, you don't, right? Like, what do you understand? There's no correlating a sound with a thing. There's no implied understanding there apart from the correlation between the sound and the thing. It was the ostensive teaching that helped to bring this about, but only together with a particular kind of instruction. With different instruction, the same ostensive teaching of these words would have affected a quite different understanding. Okay. So, let's see what the example it gives here is. I set the brake up by connecting the rod and lever, or lever. Yes, given the whole of the rest of the mechanism, only in conjunction with that it is a brake lever. And separated from its support, it's not even a lever. It may be anything or nothing. So a lever. Stop saying lever. Right. So a lever is just a stick if it doesn't have a fulcrum or something to operate on, right? So you don't really understand anything about what a lever is or what makes a lever just because you understand the word, the sound, lever being associated with a thing that might be acting like a lever. Again, I mean, this is pretty straightforward, but I'm sensing we're about to go into more abstract epistemological discourse. But before we do that, do you know Joe Rogan isn't sure what causes the tides?
Isn't that a big part of the tides? Is the gravity that comes from the moon? Is that what causes the tides?
Is the moon what causes the tides?
Isn't that a big part of the tides? Is the gravity that comes from the moon?
No idea.
Is that what causes the tides?
7. We're already at number 7, and there's only like 400 of these, so we're doing good. In the practice of the use of language, one party calls out the words, the other acts on them. However, in instruction in the language, the following process will occur. The learner names the objects, that is, he utters the word when the teacher points at the stone. Learners. What do I got here? Learners. However, in instruction, the language of the following. Indeed, there will be an even simpler exercise. The pupil repeats the words after the teacher, both of these being speech-like processes. We can also think of the whole process of using words as one of those games by means of which children learn their native language. I will call these games language games. Now, this is actually, now we're starting to get into some important things. And we'll sometimes speak of a primitive language as a language game. I find it fascinating the way like game theory plays into so much philosophy and the idea of games as a framework for just about like almost every epistemological concept that people talk about. So, 8. Ooh. Let's now look at an expansion of language. All right, we're getting more complex here, so everybody, buckle up. Besides the 4 words block, pillar, frog, etc., let it contain a sequence of words used as the shopkeeper in number 1 used number words. It may be a series of letters of the alphabet. Further, let it contain 2 words which may as well be there and this, because that roughly indicates their purpose, which are used in connection with a pointing gesture. Where's the frog? I was doing this before. Where's the Fallout bobblehead? Fallout bobblehead. There. Is that a focus? Tony, talking about the Broca's area. Yeah, I know that, having read Broca's Brain as part of my making sure that I've read everything that Carl Sagan wrote when I was young, there seemed to be a lot more certainty about where things were mapped in the brain 50 years ago. Did you just say Pluto's cave? Oh dear. Do I give you the benefit of the doubt there? Was that a typo? No, you wrote Pluto. Tell me more about Pluto's cave. Anyway, we're never going to get to 400 if I don't forge ahead. The expansion of language. Okay, there and this. There's the bobblehead. Yep. And finally, a number of color samples. So we're back to the 5 red apples, right? A gives an order like D slab there. At the same time, he shows the assistant a color sample. Oh, that's a terrible color sample, isn't it? Oh, shit. Same color. Oh no. Give me what's a reliable, here's something we can all agree is red. Color sample. At the same time, he shows the assistant a color sample, and when he utters the word there, he points to a place on the building site. So, there. There are gnats in here. Let's ignore it for now. But you notice I said there are gnats in here. Wow. I literally just... There's a very good episode of Atlanta that talks about Goofy. I'm reading all of this. I'm just trying to get through. I'm trying to get through Wittgenstein here. I need to at least hit all of the philosophers in the Monty Python Philosopher's Song. Okay, so, and then he uses the word there. He points to a place on the building site. From the stock of slabs, B takes one for each letter of the alphabet up to D of the same color as the sample and brings them to the place A indicates. On other occasions, A gives the order this, there. You know, it really would have been better for him to use names than to use A, you know. On other occasions, A gives the order this, there. At this, he points to a building stone, and so on. Wenn das Kind des Sprach lernt, when a child learns this language, wird es durch kleine Kinder, he has to learn the series of number words by heart, and he has to learn their use. Will this training include ostensive teaching of the word? Well, people will, for example, point to slabs and count, A, B, C, slabs. Something more like the ostensive teaching of the words block, pillar, etc. Would be the ostensive teaching of number words that serve not to count but to signify groups of objects that can be taken in at a glance. Children do learn the use of the first 5 or 6 elementary number words this way. So before you even really have a concept of what counting is, you can, you can recognize a group of 1, a group of 3, a group of 4, without really yet grokking what numbers actually are. Can't you? Apparently you can. Ludwig says you can. So I'm going to say that so far I'm again, this is pretty straightforward stuff. Don't disagree with any of it so far. I'm going to be interested to see where the divergence of the sort of evolution and understanding of language is, where I can perhaps notice this is where Wittgenstein and Chomsky diverge at this path in the wood. But in making the description of the uses of these words similar in this way, we cannot make the uses themselves any more like one another. For as we see, they are absolutely unlike. What is that referring to? I skipped a paragraph. Equally, one may say that the signs A, B, etc. signify numbers, when, for example, this removes the misunderstanding that A, B, C play the part actually played in the language by block, slab, or pillar. Okay, now we're talking about the things that quantify the things, right? And one may also say that C signifies, I really dislike the use of letters here. C signifies this number and not that one, right? So for example, this serves to explain that the letters are to be used in the order A, B, C, D, etc., and not in the order A, B, D, C. Simple enough. So you get the idea of how many things are a number. You get the idea of the order of numbers. All this, from what I am reading and understanding here, happens before or does not necessitate the understanding of numbers or what a number really actually is or what it refers to. Just it's mimicry, right? Or it can be mimicry. And now that paragraph makes more sense. But making the description of the uses of these words similar in this way cannot make the uses themselves any more like one another. For as we see, they're absolutely unlike. 11. Think of the tools in a toolbox. Always a good analogy. Always a good analogy. I don't know how many times in my life, in trying to describe a complex interconnected system of things, I have uttered the words, think of the tools in a toolbox. There's a hammer, pliers, a saw, a screwdriver, a rule. A rule. Oh, it's betraying its age here. A rule, a glue pot, glue, nails, and screws. Where's the Dremel? Where's the circular saw? So what kind of toolbox is this? I don't need to be told that a circular saw would not fit in a toolbox. It would fit in a big enough toolbox. The functions of words are as diverse as the functions of these objects, and in both cases there are similarities. Of course, wait a minute, there is an asterisk here, and yet there is not. Oh. Of course, what confuses us is the uniform appearance of words when we hear them in speech or see them written or in print. For their use is not that obvious, especially when we're doing philosophy. Aha! It's more like looking into the cabin of a locomotive. There are handles there, all looking more or less alike. Let's say the cockpit of an airplane. This stands to reason, since they're all supposed to be handled. But one is the handle of a crank, which can be moved continuously, let's say the trim in the cockpit of an aircraft. It regulates the opening of a valve. Another is the handle of a switch, which only has two operative positions, either on or off. It is a binary. The third is the handle of a brake lever. The harder one pulls it, the harder the braking. A fourth, the handle of a pump. It has an effect only so long as it's moved to and fro. So yeah, we're seeing things that look very similar and operate in some similar ways, and yet they are markedly and very importantly different. 13. Let's get past this one quick. If we say every word in the language signifies something, we have so far said nothing whatever unless we explain exactly what distinction we wish to make. It might be, of course, that we wanted to distinguish the words of the language from words without meaning, such as words that occur in Lewis Carroll's poems, or words like tra-la-la in a song, or E.E. Cummings. Right? All those become words, right? Jabberwocky. Don't think that's not a great example, but okay. Knowing exactly what distinction we want to make, that seems important. Suppose someone said, 14, all tools serve to modify something. No. I mean, maybe ultimately, but not primarily. It could be secondarily. A ruler does not modify something. So a hammer modifies the position of a nail, a saw the shape of a board, and so on. Oh, and here he goes. And what's modified by a rule, a glue pot, and nails? Our knowledge of the thing's length, the temperature of the glue, the solidity of a box. Okay, so would anything be gained by this assimilation of expressions? Well, I think absolutely, right? I agree. And I agree with this. I don't find these two things to be mutually exclusive. 15. The word signify is perhaps most straightforwardly applied when the name is actually a mark on the object signified. Suppose that the tools A uses, this is why I don't like the A there, because I almost used it, it's just, doesn't work. In a building bear certain marks. When A shows his assistant such a mark, the assistant brings the tool that has that mark on it. In this way, and in more or less similar ways, a name signifies a thing and is given to a thing. When philosophizing, it will often prove useful to say to ourselves, naming something is rather like attaching a name tag to a thing. Seems pretty straightforward. 16. What about the color samples that A shows to B? Are they part of the language? The samples themselves, right? Well, it is as you please. They do not belong to the spoken language. Yet when I say to someone, pronounce the word the, you will also count the second the as part of the sentence. So pronounce the word the, right? Yet it has a role just like that of a color sample in the language game. That is, it is a sample of what the other is meant to say. It's most natural, causes least confusion, if we count the samples as tools of the language. So that, to me, that just sounds like, yeah, let's just sort of make these accommodations because for the sake of a quiet life, Makes sense? So far, is there anything of this that doesn't make sense to anyone so far? It's all he's predicating stuff, right? We're agreeing on common terms to use and to build on those terms for more complex ideas that go into Wittgenstein's idea of language games, right? So I don't think that it's good to be aligned, right? "17. We could say, in language, we have different kinds of word, for the functions of the word slab and the word block are more alike than those of slab and D. But how we group words into kinds will depend on the aim of the classification and on our own inclination." Now, see what immediately, as one who has both a professional and an amateur interest in natural language understanding and processing, to me, the idea of how we group words and the different models of understanding words is interesting because this is feeding into those ideas before such concepts could have been really thought of. Maybe someone thought of them, but they would have been very frustrated, I would imagine. Imagine you're in the mid to early 20th century and you come up with, you have a eureka moment, the idea of reinforcement learning or unsupervised learning and data models. It all comes to you. And you can see how it could work and what sort of things it could do. But your toolbox is, it's not even the cabin of a locomotive, right? It is the hammer, pliers, saw, screwdriver, rule, glue pot, glue, nails, and screws. Oh, you would be quite frustrated. Applying a place marker on this page because I like to think about that stuff. 18. Don't let it bother you that languages 2 and 8 consist only of orders. If you want to say that they are therefore incomplete, ask yourself whether our own language is complete, whether it was so before the symbolism of chemistry and the notation of the infinitesimal calculus were incorporated into it, for these are, so to speak, suburbs of our language. So you see mathematics as language, definitely. As part of our language, definitely. Our language will probably always be incomplete. No, I mean, it's certainly constantly evolving, much to my chagrin and my consternation, right? Having to accommodate all these kids on my lawn saying that psych is spelled S-I-K-E. Whatever, dudes. It's a very Aristotelian thing that there are specific aims and actions, be it material or metaphysical. Isn't it? Aren't there specific aims and I mean, would that be like just the purview of Aristotle? Oh man, Levy, I think we're screwed. I don't think. Why would it ever stop? I mean, look at Old English, right? Like 500 years from now, probably be I got a comment from someone named Make $750 per day. I'm sure it's valid. Nothing is just like Jordan Peterson says. And his when we talk about like there has to be a start and an end to everything, his incessant reductive going down the or up the hierarchy of like what or would it be down the hierarchy, whatever, going back further and further to take apart what anything means and try to come to agreements for things that we already have a very clear gestalt understanding of what these things mean as a way of like sounding smart or something is one of the most, I mean, there's a lot of frustrating things about that dude, but that's one of the most frustrating things. But, you know, he is super honest, right?
I believe that truth will save the world. So you speak truthfully.
I didn't sleep at all for
I
25
mean, he
days.
didn't
I read
sleep
about 200 books
for
on
25
ecology
days
and
straight
economy when I worked for the UN for about a 2-year
when
period.
pressed on it.
I believe that truth will save.
He was quite adamant that he genuinely did not sleep for 25 days straight, which would double the Guinness World Record because he lies all the time. And he has, you know, he has issues. And why am I? No. Not. Here, I need a. There we go. None of this. None of it. Okay, 19. Is it easy to imagine a language consisting only of orders and reports in battle? Or a language consisting only of questions and expressions for answering yes and no, and countless other things, and to imagine a language means to imagine a form of life? Yes. It's very easy, right? Especially like anyone who's ever done any scripting or, well, now that you, I mean, I'm a contrarian, Olivia, so I guess
believe
it's
that
not
truth
enough.
will save the world.
Guess
So
we have to hear it
speak
again.
truthfully.
I
and
didn't
it's
sleep at
your
all for
fault.
25 days.
I read about 200 books on ecology
I need a
and
sound that
economy
is
when
linked
I worked for the UN
to
for about
showing
a
that.
2-year period.
But I don't have one. So what do I have?
He had a really cool outfit and stuff, and he was a really good architect. And
Kanye.
he didn't kill 6 million Jews. That's just like factually
Come back.
incorrect.
Oh, you're using reverse psychology on me. Because you love JBP. All right. So anyway, so yes, it's easy to imagine like very confined, constrained languages where you only have a few words, right? If you've ever played a text adventure, right? Go north, walk north. I don't understand walk. Go north. You go north. North. What do you want me to do with north, right? Limited sets of linguistic systems. But what about this? Is the call slab in example 2 a sentence or a word? So if the builder goes, oh here, if this is over here, and I say to you all, frog, as in frog, obviously you can't bring me the frog, but if you could, right? And yes, obviously, sentences can be one word. Is it a sentence or a word? I mean, it can be both, right? If a word, surely it has not the same meaning as a like-sounding word of our ordinary language, for now it's a call. But if a sentence, it's surely not the elliptical sentence slab of our language. As far as the first question goes, you can call slab a word and also a sentence. Right. I need to stop being speculative here because I'm getting ahead of what are things that are patently obvious, right? Perhaps it could aptly be called a degenerate sentence, and as one speaks of degenerate hyperbola. It is in fact our elliptical spricht. Und zwar ist ein eben unser elliptischer Satz. Aber der ist doch... But that is surely only a shortened form of the sentence, bring me a slab. Yes. Yes. I was just using that as an example of like limited linguistic systems. That was good German. How about this? Wer ist euch kleine Kinder? Wer has given in pistoles? Wer schießt American soldiers? Getot. Or O Tannenbaum, der grüße deine Blätter. Right? I remember my grandmother spoke German. My parents spoke only German when they wanted us to not understand them. Hey, nice profile pic. Du hast. I have to get back to this now. We're having too much fun here. This isn't supposed to be fun. Nothing fun. There's nothing fun about the language game as defined by... Look, do you really think that someone named Ludwig Wittgenstein could ever let his hair down? He was very rich. He was born rich, extremely rich. His siblings were wastrels, and they were plagued by mental illness. Most of them committed suicide, I believe, which is not a fun thing. Probably some of that came from, the fact that intelligence and idle hands, etc. Didn't strike me as a super fun guy. Probably winced whenever he referred to like this as a language game. Right? Philosophy. Philosopher. So it's surely a shortened form of the sentence. Look, we're on 19. We're actually doing pretty well. Bring me a slab. And there's no such sentence in our example. But why shouldn't I conversely have the sentence, bring me a slab, a lengthening of the sentence slab? So, yeah. So we're thinking of slab, frog, as a shortening of bring me the frog. But you also notice I'm doing this, right? If I just said frog, that's not as clear as frog, which is not as clear as frog, which is not as clear as frog. Frog. Right? So, obviously, right, I hate saying the word obviously, but we can look at it a bunch of different ways. So, you can mean it sometimes as one word, sometimes as four. How does one usually mean it? I think that's probably important. I think we'll be inclined to say we mean the sentence as one consisting of four words when we use it in contrast to other sentences, such as hand me a slab, bring him a slab, bring two slabs, etc. That is, in contrast with sentences containing the words of our command in other combinations. So there's a basic sort of fundamental understanding that is contextually derived, wherein you can shorten or eliminate words entirely and still get your meaning completely across, but it's completely dependent on that context existing, right? That context does not exist. If that context does not exist, then what does slab mean, right? If we've established that, look, what I really need, like every time you bring this over, I need two slabs because this thing is, its work is easier that way than when I say slab. I don't need to say slabs. I just say slab. So do you say the unshortened sentence to your, ooh, interesting. So how do you do this when you say slab? Do you say the unshortened sentence to yourself when you say the shortened sentence aloud? And why should I translate the call slab into a different expression in order to say what someone means by it? And if they mean the same thing, why shouldn't I say when he says slab, he means slab? No, that. Do you say the unshortened sentence to yourself? Again, why shouldn't you be able to mean slab if you can mean bring me the slab? But when I call out slab, then what I want is that he should bring me a slab, certainly. But what does wanting this consist in thinking some form or other of different sentence from the one that you utter? All right. Yeah. Okay. 20. But now it looks as if when someone says, bring me a slab, he could mean this expression as one long word corresponding indeed to the single word slab. Yeah, let's just stuff it all. Let's just concatenate it, stuff it all together. Oh, hey, Anna. Yeah, we're talking about Wittgenstein's language games. I'm going through his philosophical investigations, starting from the beginning, and we're like just a few pages in. Sailor should play this. Play what? We have that Maryland education. We're so smart. Okay. It's good to be smart. You just had a clear memory of learning this many eons ago. Oh, okay. Well, good. Jump in if you want to clarify for anybody. Because I have not read this. Some of this I've heard before, but I have not read this. Okay. So it can be sometimes one word or sometimes four. And how does one usually mean it? Okay. Yeah, I already did this. But what does using one sentence in contrast to all others consist of? Does one have the others in mind at the same time? All of them? And while one is saying the one sentence, or before or afterwards. So you're thinking, I need that slab. And then there is a voice that has to sort of tell you, it's not a voice per se, but something has to tell you to say, I am A, I need to tell B, bring me the slab. Now there are ways I can say that. I can say, bring me a slab. Or I can say, slab. Or I could say, bring me the slab. How much sort of pre-thought goes into that before we actually say the word that we say? Obviously, it happens very, very quickly. One might be sort of compelled to say, like, well, you don't think about it at all. But I think that's probably just like a matter of scale, really. Right? And you're talking about things happening in a relative instant. It doesn't mean they don't happen. But who knows? Maybe that's wrong. Apparently it is wrong. No. Even if such an explanation rather tempts us, we need only think for a moment of what actually happens in order to see that we are on the wrong track here. Okay, so where did I fuck up? Section 20. No, boy, there's egg on my face. Egg. We say that we use the command in contrast with other sentences because our language contains the possibility of those other sentences. Someone who did not understand our language, a foreigner who had fairly often heard someone give the order, bring me a slab, might believe this whole sequence of sounds was one word, corresponding perhaps to the word for building stone in his language. If he himself had given the order, perhaps he would have pronounced it differently, and we'd say he pronounces it so oddly because he takes it for a single word. Certainly things like that have happened to me before. But then is there not also something different going on in him when he pronounces it, something corresponding to the fact that he conceives the sentence as a single word? The same thing may go on in him, or something different. What goes on in you when you give such an order? Frog. Are you conscious of its consisting of 4 words while you are uttering it? Of course you know this language, which contains those other sentences as well. But is this knowing something that happens while you are uttering the sentence? I'm gonna be a little contrarian here. That was his focus. It's still philosophy. It's a philosophy of like how we think and the how it corresponds to language. I don't want to bust in here with my Ludwig Wittgenstein is wrong. I guess I feel like we can think things without knowing that we're thinking them. And it can very much happen in an instant. And it becomes what we call like second nature. Like I have a strange ability to see words backwards. It probably comes from being to some extent, and I don't want to take away from this, but dyslexic, same reason. I've been reading Stella Maris. Very strange, like some of the things that go on in this book by Cormac McCarthy. It takes the form of a dialogue between the main character, or one of the main characters from The Passenger, and her psychiatrist. And some of the things that she says are like, I'm like, holy shit, that's what I do that. One of the things that she does is at one point the psychiatrist asks her, well, tell me something weird about you. And she says, well, I can tell time in a mirror. And he says, well, what's weird about that? Like, I can tell time in a mirror too. And she's like, no, but you have to think about it and figure it out, whereas I just see it and know it. Right? So I can do that too, and it very much feels like a natural response. I guess the question there is like, is it just that you do it so quickly you don't realize that you do it? I mean, at some level, like instinctual things have to happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're not thinking about them. Some portion of our brain is not thinking that stuff through. I'll also tell you, like, if you've read The Passenger or thinking of reading The Passenger and or Stella Maris, so far I've been enjoying Stella Maris more than The Passenger because it's been a very straightforward, essentially exploration of a schizophrenic mind. As told by, who can express themselves, let's see, like this. There's a paragraph or sentence in there where the protagonist is talking about her not wanting to go on psychiatric medication for her schizophrenia. And she says to her doctor, "You don't know what antipsychotics do to a person. All we have to go on is a spectacle of the tardive dyskinetics jerking along the wall. You don't know what's down there. There's data in the world only available to those experiencing extreme wretchedness. Joy, on the other hand, barely even teaches gratitude." It's paraphrased, but that's something Cormac does, right? You can just he does words good. All right. What goes on you when you give such an order? Are you conscious of it consisting four words while you are uttering it? You know this language. The sentence is elliptical, not because it leaves out something that we mean when we utter it, but because it is shortened in comparison with a particular paradigm of our grammar. Of course, someone might object here. You grant, and I think I did object. You grant that the shortened and then the unshortened sentence have the same sense. What is this sense, then? Isn't there a verbal expression for this sense? Well, that seems tautological, right? Doesn't there having the same sense consistent, having the same use? In Russia, one says stone red instead of the stone is red. Does the sense they grasp lack the cupola, or do they add the cupola in thought? Okay, so imagine a language game in which A asks, B reports the number of slabs or blocks in a pile, or the colors and shapes of the building stones that are stacked in such and such a place. Such a report might read something like 5 slabs. Now, what's the difference between the report of the assertion 5 slabs and the order 5 slabs? And the part is which uttering these words plays in the language game. So, right, now obviously the language game has to account for everything, not just things that are written, not just things that are spoken, everything. He'll get to it, Qwerty. He'll get to it. He's going to get to it. I don't think he would be revered the way that he is if he didn't. I think philosophy is practical insofar as it's as practical as anything else, which I guess is to say not practical. But if we're talking about like a relative frame of reference for practicality, I feel like philosophy is pretty practical. I remember in my youth, it's strange the things that you remember, but I very distinctly remember talking to someone that I admired, and they told me that they had gotten their degree in philosophy. and I, being young and a bit of a dick, was like, oh, a waste of money. Strangely enough, now I actually do think it was a waste of money, but for different reasons. Like at the time, I think I was saying waste of money to study something that's not going to be of any practical use to you. But much like music, right? Like I do feel like learning music, learning philosophy, all those things are applicable in ways that might be hard to quantify, but maybe not that hard to quantify in much more practical matters, right? And I don't think it's a matter of like, well, you show an aptitude in music that points towards a skill that is more practically applicable, and you just happen to also be interested in music because of it. No, I think that, in the case of music, in the case of philosophy, like learning these things and learning how to make these connections and seeing these in a way where they do start to feel natural, where you can like tell time in a clock in a mirror, without, whether you're actually thinking about it or you're just thinking about it so quickly that, it feels like you're not thinking about it. Either way, right, it helps you. And I definitely feel like it helps you when you're trying to make sense of things that may be a little bit foggy or ambiguous. I'll say a phrase that I'm sure Anna's very familiar with, helps with navigating ambiguity. Okay. So yeah, the difference between 5 slabs as a report and 5 slabs as an order is the part in which uttering the words plays in the language game, but the tone of voice in which they're uttered is likely to be different too. 5 slabs. 5 slabs. Right? The facial expression, some other things. Frog. But we could also imagine the tones being the same, for an order and a report can be spoken in a variety of tones of voice and with various facial expressions. The difference being only in that only in the use that is made of these words. Of course, we might also use the words assertion and command to signify a grammatical form of a sentence and a particular intonation, just as we would call the sentence, "Isn't the weather glorious today?" a question, even though it's used as an assertion. That's phatic, right? Like we're just talking about, that's just a phatic phrase there. Okay. We could imagine a language all assertions. We could imagine a language in which all assertions had the form and tone of rhetorical questions, or every command had the form of a question. Would you like to? Whoa. Did Ken Levine read Wittgenstein? Did Wittgenstein just predict Bioshock? Interesting. I've no doubt that Ken Levine has read Wittgenstein. Perhaps it will then be said, what he says has the form of a question, but it's really a command. Would you kindly? That is, it has the function of a command in the linguistic practice. Similarly, one says, you will do this not as a prophecy, but as a command. Right. What makes it one or the other? Did I miss? 22. Frege's opinion that every assertion contains an assumption, which is the thing that is asserted, really rests on the possibility, found in our language, of writing every assertoric sentence in the form, it is asserted that such and such is the case. But that such and such is the case is not a sentence in our language. It is not yet a move in the language game. And if I write, not it is asserted that, but it is asserted such and such is the case, the words it is asserted become superfluous. Right. Okay. How does that relate to Bioshock? The premise of Bioshock was Atlas prefacing everything that he said to you with, or most of the things he said to you that were orders, with "would you kindly," and you were hypnotized previously to be triggered by the phrase "would you kindly" and do anything that was said after that. And it was a sort of meta commentary on the fact that, like, games give you the illusion of choice, but you really just have to kind of do whatever the game wants you to do. It can be more than one thing, and the very fact that Ayn Rand was so much reflected in Bioshock was one of the reasons why I was like, well, Ken Levine definitely read Wittgenstein. No, I think Ayn Rand's reputation is pretty bad. I don't know about, like, how good of a writer she was, right? Or how bad of an actual writer she was, but her ideas are pretty terrible. Similar to, well, like Agatha Christie, right? Agatha Christie was a pretty ho-hum writer. Pretty good racist. Where does this come from, Olivia? Like, why is no man going to like Ayn Rand? I mean, she was, objectivism is, like, do we want to get into that? You're gonna say that the reason, like people don't like Ayn Rand is because they're male? She was probably, like, one of the most anti-feminist female writers that I can think of. But anyway, I want to get back into this. I mean, she's no Kanye. Yeah, I know Bioshock was not meant to be in praise of Ayn Rand. However, Rush lyrics kind of were. And, Peart definitely had a phase where he, to each according to their need, etc. Well, that's not objectivism. What am I talking about? Too much stuff going on at once. I want to focus back in on this. I'm getting thrown off the track. And I felt like something important was just said. Oh, right. Yes. Okay. So every assertion contains an assumption. Okay. The thing that's asserted. And that rests on the possibility found in language of writing every assertive sentence in the form, it is asserted that such and such is the case. But that such and such is the case is not a sentence in our language. It's not yet a move in the language game. And if I write not it is asserted that, but it is asserted such and such is the case, the words it is asserted just become superfluous. So you don't need them, right? You just make the assertion. We might very well also write every assertion in the form of a question followed by an affirmative expression. I hate it when people do this. I really don't like when people do this. I've also noticed, like, a lot of Spanish speakers will, when they're speaking English, if their English is a second language, they'll often, like, end the question with no, like, as a question, right? We do this, and this is a comparatively recent thing, like, that I've noticed in my lifetime, where we pose more and more things as questions as a way as a sort of bulwark against the possibility of being wrong. And we do that by saying like right after things a lot. And I remember noticing it and being like, this is strange. Like I've never noticed that people doing this before. And you don't see it in writing. You see it in casual conversation. Well, it doesn't have to be casual conversation, but dialectics, right? You see it in discussions. You see it, or you hear it, sorry. People do stuff like, and it went this way, right? And things were kind of feeling like this, right? And they'll put that right there at the end. And now I've gotten to the point where I do it all the damn time now. Dude, Roll the Bones. I mean, let's forget about the rap. It does have a couple of my favorite Rush songs on it. So Ghost of a Chance and Dreamline or Dreamtime. Dreamline? Right. Yes. Notice this too. And I wonder how much of that is like cultural, like how much of that is actually an effort to try and not be rude, you know? Yeah, Anna, yeah, I've noticed you do it. I notice I do it like I don't remember it being a thing 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Like I distinctly remember it kind of starting to happen and being kind of confused by it and being like, well, I'm not going to do that. But then within a couple of years, I was doing it, right? So very weird. And being touched on here, right? Like we may very well also write every assertion in the form of a question followed by an affirmative expression. Is it raining? Yes. Would this show that every assertion contained a question? Of course, one has the right to use an assertion sign in contrast with a question mark. For example, or if one wants to distinguish an assertion from a fiction or an assumption, it's a mistake only if one thinks that the assertion consists of two acts. See, yeah, because you're really just kind of bundling this thing into one. In two acts, entertaining and asserting, assigning a truth value or something of the kind. And that in performing these acts, we follow the sentence sign by sign, roughly as we sing from sheet music. Ooh, I like this. So if you kind of take it literally, then you're actually not interpreting it the way that it's meant to be interpreted, right? But see, the thing is, like, I see this as more, I see these expressions, and again, I think they're phatic, right? Man, Nasha, how are you like in my head when it comes to music right now? He just needs a helping hand. But Cordia, I feel like this isn't meant to like force a conclusion. It feels more like, and I'm not saying that I'm right. Obviously, I could be wrong, right? I feel like it's more giving others. It's like a polite thing. It's like giving others the ability to, without feeling like they are really kind of contradicting what you're saying because you posed it as a question, right? Or to some extent, I just did that thing, right? And I just did it again and not intending to do it. It's at the point now where it's just a tick of mine, just like saying anyway, right? So I guess I don't see it. I'm not saying it's not an Eastern or Western difference. I have no idea where the difference comes from. I'm just saying, like, I don't know that it's there because the goal is to push towards a conclusion. I feel like it's there because we want to be nice. We're insecure. That's our insecurity, like coming right up to the fore. Yeah, like what Anna says, right? It's like making space. No. Although this is another example of that, right? Shut the hell up, me. That's just annoying. I will never go quietly into the good night of talking like this, which I hear more and more people doing, and it really is annoying. Kids in the hall used to make fun of it all the time, but now it's just a valid pattern of speech, and I don't like it. But maybe that is exactly why it's done, right? Maybe it is, all of this is just like, don't hurt me. Right? Don't, if you're gonna tell me that I'm wrong, I'm gonna put this little proviso in everything that I say so that you can do it in a way that isn't necessarily as hurtful as it would otherwise be if I spoke with just extreme sort of decisiveness on, yes, I know exactly what I'm talking about. And ironically, right, probably people who do that, actually not leaving that space in there makes them the louder voices in the room. The loudest voice in the room isn't always technically the loudest voice in the room. It is the most dominant voice in the room. You know what I'm talking about. All right, let's keep moving forward. Reading the written sentence loudly or softly is indeed comparable to singing from sheet music, but meaning, thinking the sentence is read, is not. So there you go, right? You don't see people putting the right after everything when they're writing stuff down. It's only when they're saying it. The Phrygian assertion sign marks the beginning of a sentence, so its function is like that of a full stop. Is it? It distinguishes the whole period from a clause within the period. Oh, okay. If I hear someone say, it's raining, but I do not know whether I've heard the beginning and end of the period, then so far this sentence fails to convey anything to me. Okay, I get it. Right. It's raining. That's a statement about it raining, but you could very well sort of get into, hear it in a different way or hear it in the middle of a way that could be the opposite. I don't know what you were looking for. Look at this. This is great. Great to hear this all the time. All right. Imagine a picture representing a boxer in a particular fighting stance. Well, this picture can be used to tell someone how he should stand, hold himself, or how he should not hold himself, or how one particular man did stand in such and such a place, and so on. One might, using the language of chemistry, call this picture a sentence radical. Frege probably conceived of the assumption along these lines. So yeah, right. So you get you see the picture. You don't have the context of what is this picture conveying. 23, but how many kinds of sentence are there? Say assertion, question, command. Okay. There are countless kinds. Excuse me. There are countless different kinds of use of all things we call signs, words, sentences. And this diversity is not something fixed, given once for all, but new types of language, new language games, as we may say, come into existence, and others become obsolete and get forgotten. We can get a rough picture of this from the changes in mathematics, and of course, get a not so rough picture of this just from how much language has changed because of internet culture. It's certainly accelerated the rate of the evolution of language, along with tons of other things. The word language game, oh, look, he's defining, he doesn't want you to think that the word game there is like its typical use. He means game in the philosophical sense, like game theory, right? Don't think there's anything fun about a language game. Ludwig would not appreciate that. He doesn't want you having fun. The word language game is used here to emphasize the fact that the speaking of language is part of an activity or a form of life. Consider the variety of language games in the following examples and in others. Giving orders and acting on them, describing an object by its appearance or by its measurements, constructing an object from a description, reporting an event, speculating about the event, forming and testing a hypothesis, presenting the results of an experiment in tables or diagrams, making up a story, reading one, acting in a play, singing rounds, guessing riddles, cracking a joke, telling one. What's the difference between cracking a joke and telling a joke? Isn't cracking a joke telling a joke? I don't know. One thing I have noticed is this fan brush makes a great sound on the grill of this microphone. I actually prefer it to a softer brush. Oh, I don't know. That's pretty good too. And I actually used this brush today when I guess they all have their charms to soothe the savage breast. It's actually charms to soothe the savage breast, I think is the actual phrase there. Oops. I put on airplane mode. Yeah, music has charms to soothe the savage breast, which has become beast. Partially thanks again to Rush. Man, what's up with Rush? Fucking Ayn Rand in us, and they're sugarcoating all their ideals and malapropisms, and it's getting through to us. Don't like that one so much. I think this is still my favorite. Also, because of the length of it, it really gives you a lot of control over how you do it. Also, it's champ at the bit, I think. I might have been proven wrong on that. I think it's champing at the bit, not chomping at the bit. All right, so cracking a joke, telling a joke, solving a problem in applied arithmetic, translating from one language to another. Okay, these are all just examples of things that, okay. It's interesting to compare the diversity of the tools of language and the ways in which they are used. Yeah. The diversity of kinds of words in sentence with what logicians have said about the structure of language. This includes the author of the Tractatus Logica Philosophica. 24. Somebody who does not bear in mind the variety of language games will perhaps be inclined to ask questions like, what is a question? Is it a way of stating that I do not know such and such, or that I wish the other person would tell me? Or is it a description of my mental state of uncertainty? And is the cry help such a description? Sounds like that guy. Remember how many different kinds of things are called description. A description of a body's position by means of its coordinates. Here's a sort of interesting, by the way, when I mentioned at the beginning of this, how I was amazed at the fact that they were able to keep German and English lined up from page to page. You can see sometimes they're just big old spaces there to keep them in sync. Remember how many different kinds of things are called description. A description of a body's position by means of its coordinates, description of a facial expression, description of a sensation of touch, of a mood. Of course, it is possible to substitute for the usual form of a question the form of a statement or description. I want to know whether, or I am in doubt whether, but this does not bring the different language games any closer together. The significance of such possibilities of transformation, for example, of turning all assertoric sentences into sentences beginning with the prefix I think or I believe. I do that all the time. I think or I believe, and thus as it were into descriptions of my inner life will become clearer in another place, parentheses, solipsism. Okay. Yeah, fine. Fine. Great. Well, yeah, but champing of the bit is yeah, when people say that, that's generally what they're referring to. All right. God, I hate solipsisms. And yet I am guilty, I guess, of I'm always like saying, just assume that every sentence I say starts with I think that, or I have a vague notion that. And apparently that's just like a really selfish, solipsistic way to approach language, according to Ludwig. 25. It's sometimes said animals do not talk because they lack the mental abilities. And this means they do not think, and that's why they do not talk. Bullshit. But they simply do not talk. Or better, they do not use language. If we disregard the most primitive forms of language, giving orders, asking questions, telling stories, having a chat, are as much a part of our natural history as walking, eating, drinking, and playing. Is that it? He's not going to go into... I mean, obviously animals think, and obviously animals communicate, and they do what... They engage in language games. I guess the key there is the phrase, if we disregard the most primitive forms of language, but I don't know that there is still the argument to be made that, you know, gorillas like Coco or whatever, they would be in the what was being called earlier just stuff that's taught ostensibly, stuff that like you memorize, that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 refer to batches of things, but you don't necessarily know what the numbers themselves mean. And yet if someone says, bring me 3 of the thing, you can bring them 3 of a thing. You don't have to know what the numbers mean in order to have an understanding of like a quantity assigned to a sound. But I don't know. That again, like any time, any argument that gives way to special pleading when it comes to like the position of Homo sapiens as the apex thinker. I mean, clearly, I guess we are, but when it comes to like there being this gigantic divide, that, you know, well, like I just said, it screams to me of special pleading. and wanting to be at the center of the universe. So I think we would have to disregard more than just the most primitive forms of language to make that assumption. 26, but that's another tangent. 26. One thinks that learning language consists in giving names to objects. For example, to human beings, to shapes, to colors, to pains, to moods, numbers, etc. It's interesting that he put to pains there. He only listed a few things there. Pain was one of them. Pain. Oh, good luck with your... Good luck with your studying. Yeah, I know it was published in 1953. I still think, even in 1953, I think they had a pretty decent idea of, well, maybe they didn't. No. I mean, they definitely did in the 60s. So, I don't think there are many people who think this. I don't think there are many people in the intelligence community who think that intelligence is beneficial for survival. Most people, I think, believe that our brains expanded too quickly and that you look at the correlation of like animal suicide and who are the only animals that commit suicide. There have been like a few non-verified cases of like dogs doing it. But the problem there is that there's no evidence that what they were doing, that they knew what they were doing would result in their death. Like there's a difference between I'm really sad, I'm not eating because I'm so sad, and I'm not going to eat so that I can die, right? Like there's a big difference between those two things. So there you go, right? Like just the fact that, if assuming that's true, that humans might be, but did you? Okay, but okay. I believe that, yeah, intelligence is the amount of intelligence that we have is actually probably a stumbling block to our continued existence. I think if we were to sort of do if we were to do a kind of, some kind of the same equation that we would use the Drake equation, when it comes to life on other planets, if we were to do the Drake equation for like how intelligence affects us long term, do the balance sheet, like, okay, well, maybe intelligence helps us survive because, I'm talking about the amount of intelligence that we have, right? Because there's, according to most, a pretty big gulf there, and whether the intelligence came before the opposable thumbs or whether the opposable thumbs came first or the intelligence came first, that's up in the air, right? Like the expansion of the pelvic bones of Homo sapiens as a result of walking upright, right? Like allowed for, these larger craniums to exist. Larger craniums resulted in people being able to use weapons, etc., and evolution did its thing. But short-term evolutionary gains are no guarantee of long-term evolutionary gains. And if we're talking about, well, yes, it let us dominate this planet, but it's also going to lead to our destruction, then ultimately, we fucked ourselves, right? Elon Musk would probably disagree. He thinks our intelligence is going to bring us to other planets and allow us to continue to survive long after our sun has died out. And he may be right, or we may just destroy ourselves, right? either way, the jury's out. We could be half as intelligent as we are. It's a weird thing to say, like, how do you gauge that, right? But we could be much less intelligent than we are right now, and we'd still be, the dominant species on the planet. And we really should only be as intelligent as we need to be to ensure our continued survival. We shouldn't have all this extra intelligence that leads us to be the only species of animal that commits suicide. We're not the only species of animal that rapes or, murders for territory or tribal reasons. We're not the only animal that does that, but we are the only animal that could then take that propensity and elevate it to the proportions of the Manhattan Project, etc. Right. Anyway, back to, I like that we're sort of skipping around and talking all that stuff. Yeah, I do. I'm doing one tomorrow, and then we've got a couple scheduled for next week. Hold on a second. Paul, could you come here for a second? Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, he's playing Callisto Protocol, so he can't right now. But yeah, we've got a bunch coming out in the next couple weeks. Thanks for asking. Anyway, it's interesting that he mentioned pain there. To repeat, naming is something like attaching a name tag to a thing. One can call this a preparation for the use of a word. But what is it a preparation for? Wait, just said. It's preparation for a use of the word. But what is it a preparation for? Use of a word. Let's see if we get more insight going a little further. 27. We name things and then we can talk about them. Can refer to them in talk. As if what we did next were given with the mere act of naming. Well, so naming is like really powerful, right? As if there were only one thing called talking about things, whereas in fact we do the most various things with our sentences. Think just of exclamations with their completely different functions. Water, away, ow, help, splendid, no. Are you still inclined to call these words names of objects? Well, water. But yeah, sure. In languages 2 and 8, there were no such thing as asking something's name. This, with its correlate, ostensive explanation, this is what we were talking about earlier, ostensive explanation. I'm not following. Yeah, I'm not really following what's going on in chat right now. I'm going to go on. So ostensive explanation being the sort of understanding of sounds correlating to things without really understanding what the thing is or the sound is, really. More an understanding of the relation itself. We might say that is a language game in its own right. Oh, interesting. That is really to say, that's really to say we are brought up, trained to ask, what is that called? What is this called? Upon which the name is given. Frog. And there's also the language game of inventing a new name for something, that is, of saying, this is called a frog. Naming conventions are incredibly important. So, for example, children give names to their dolls and then talk about them and to them. Consider in this connection how singular is the use of a person's name to call him. Okay, yes, certainly important. 28. Now, one can ostensibly define a person's name, the name of a color, the name of a material, a number word, the name of a point of the compass, and so on. The definition of the number 2, that is called 2, pointing to 2 nuts. Maybe should have not used nuts there. That's perfectly exact, but how can the number 2 be defined like that? The person 1 gives the definition. The person 1 gives the definition to doesn't know what it is that one wants to call 2. He will suppose that 2 is the name given to this group of nuts. Okay. He may suppose this, but perhaps he does not. He might make the opposite mistake. When I want to assign a name to this group of nuts, he might take it to be the name of a number, and he might equally well take a person's name, which I explain ostensibly as that of a color. So that's the problems with ostensive naming and ostensive relations between language and objects. There's just no way to know what the exact meaning is that you're trying. You don't understand what the actual meaning is. You're just doing association. That is to say, an ostensive definition can be variously interpreted in any case. Could one not explain the word red? Could one not explain the word red by pointing to something that was not red? What's that weird there's that statistical kind of strangeness, right, where you can basically, like, the existence of, and this is just like a statistical theory, right, but apparently it's true. The existence of a white dove, like seeing a white dove, lowers the probability of the existence of doves of another color. I forget what that's called. There's actually a word for that, but I forget what that is. But so, yeah, can you explain the word red by pointing to something that was not red? That would be as if one had to explain the word modest to someone whose English was poor, and one pointed to an arrogant man and said, that man is not modest. That it is ambiguous is no argument against such form of explanation. Any explanation can be misunderstood, right? Of course. Well, I'm not, like, there's always this idea that, like, what I interpret as red isn't what you interpret as red. Like what Anna is saying here, right? Color is not an objective concept, but it is a relative concept that is relatively consistent as far as we can tell, and color blindness kind of bears that out. Right? Certain types of color blindness bears that out. I mean, completely disregarding, like, the fact that colors do have frequencies, right? But there's nothing that could prove, and this is, we're going to talk about solipsistic. This is fucking solipsistic as hell. What you see as the color red, I could see as the color blue, right? Every time I see red, you see blue. I'm not saying that the wavelengths are different. I see the same wavelength that you do, but my visual cortex, for some reason, makes it blue. Though I think the reason that doesn't work is because there are, in red-green color blindness, like, there are colors that there's a relationship between colors that causes it to be like, okay, well, no, that's probably not true, because then we wouldn't be seeing the patterns that we're seeing. But I don't know enough about that to talk about it. I don't know enough about any of this shit to talk about it. So please, oh, Noah. I agree. And beholders are difficult beasts to destroy. Each eye stalk is capable of casting a different spell. They levitate. They can turn invisible. I think their main eye has a chance of turning you to stone. So, if you run into a beholder, turn around. But one might well ask, are we still to call this an explanation? For of course it plays a different role in the calculus from what we ordinarily call the ostensive explanation of the word read, even if it has the same practical consequences, the same effect on the learner. Okay, so man, German is so cool looking. Perhaps someone will say 2 can be ostensibly defined only in this way. Okay, yeah. This number is called 2. For the word number here shows what place in language and grammar we assign to the word. But this means that the word number must be explained before that ostensive definition can be understood. And here we do get into like a little bit of that, right? Fucking, how do you describe a number? What do you mean when you say a number? What do you mean when you say a color? Like, fuck you. That's what I mean. I mean, fuck you. The word number in the definition does indeed indicate this place, the post at which we station the word. And we can prevent misunderstandings by saying this color is called so-and-so. Look, I'm all for diving into like the intricacies of semantics and the inadequacies that you can find in almost every part of certainly the English language, but any language, and how inadequate language is at expressing things that we really want to feel or that we really want to express. It's an abstraction layer, and it's the best we can do, but it's not necessarily very good. And it's probably like one of the reasons why we are moved to express ourselves in so many ways other than through language. And I'm talking about, when I say language, I mean spoken written language. I'm not talking about music as a language there. That's one of the other kinds of languages I'm referring to. I just don't think that there's any place for that kind of pedantry when you're trying to have like an argument about something or a debate about something, right? Like, you know what I mean. You know exactly what I mean. I know what I mean. I know what you mean. You know what I mean. Don't try and rabbit hole this. Don't try and turn like what is an ideological sort of discussion based on something that could be really, really important and difficult to parse and might have ramifications for people, that like people dying, right? Don't turn that into an opportunity to be like, well, I think that you don't really understand what this word means, and I think we need to really kind of delve into that and understand it. So, I mean, I don't think you know what love is. So, what do you mean when you say love? Either way, you're using the very thing that you've called out as being insufficient to describe the thing to describe the thing. So you're not going to get anywhere that's circular. That's a tautology. That guy's whole existence is a solipsism. I don't like him. I'm talking about him again. Sorry. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I want to do a series of dark Jordan Peterson imitations, like ASMR imitations. But I fear that they might be interpreted as like some kind of tacit endorsement. So in order for me to really do that in a way that would be that I could accept, it would have to be pretty scathing. And I'm ostracizing people enough, it seems, mostly by, flashing all this cash all the time. And my gold grilled microphones. No, Peterson he no longer teaches. He just appears on podcasts and lectures. Oh, hey Lexi, I did not see you. Hello. Well, I've tried that. And I do have this. Oh, it's gone. It's gone. There's my stomach. It's gone. Sorry. I did have the This Thought is Dumb, which I just kind of want to have up all the time. Oh, here it is. There we go. Please. Look, upvote, downvote, that's activity. That serves the algorithm. You think you're doing me a disservice. You're not. Go for it. Okay. All right, so we're talking about... Can you explain that something is the way it is? Can I explain that this frog is green by saying that this brush is not green? Seems like a backwards way to do it. But one might well ask, are we still to call this an explanation? For of course it plays a different role in the calculus from what we ordinarily call an ostensive explanation of the word read, even if it has the same practical consequences, the same effect on the learner. I already read that. We're already on to the number 2. Okay, so the number 2, right, numbers, and I think mathematicians would probably agree here. Laura, hey, yeah, I shaved my head. Parts of it, anyway. And I was told it made me look like Richard Spencer. So, I don't know. I'm planning to use it as a undercover, as a way to go undercover. So let's get into numbers, right? Because numbers are real unless they're not real. True. And man, no, that's not the right response. The response there is supposed to be no. You do not look like Richard Spencer. Ryan, don't worry about it, man. I'm just messing around. It's okay. Like I get asked that a lot. A lot. I'm my own person. I'm not just, the guy who did a couple of videos with Ephemeral Rift. I guess I kind of am that guy. Yeah, Nasha's. I trust, Nasha, that you are wielding the band hammer with responsibility. No, I'm definitely not there. Q. Well, it's strange. Like the moment that I did it, I started to feel less and less tolerant. I will consider this, Cordimus, sorry. Look, I want to learn more about this kind of stuff, but I guess what I'm just talking about here is, the fact that mathematicians seem to think that they're better than everybody else and are dealing with the only concept that would exist irrespective of there being somebody to observe it, and everything else is just relative to whether or not there is a person there to observe it, right? But not math, no. So perhaps someone will say 2 can be ostensibly defined only in this way. The number is called 2. For the word number, in this case, shows what place in language and grammar we assign to the word. But this means that the word number must be explained before that ostensive definition can be understood. The word number in the definition does indeed indicate this place, the post at which we station the word. And we can prevent misunderstandings by saying, this color is called so-and-so, and this length is called so-and-so, and so on. That is to say, misunderstandings are sometimes averted in this way. But does one have to take the words color and length in just this way? Okay, well, we'll just have to explain them. Explain then by means of other words. This is literally like just what we were talking about. Good night, Katerina. Thank you for hanging around. I assumed you meant fictionalist, but I'm not going to make any claims about mathematicians, except for the ones I already made. So you're using the system to describe the system itself. It's tautological. It can't really be done, but it can be done. It's just like not a surefire way to go about it. Explain then by means of other words. And what about the last explanation in this chain? Don't say there isn't a last explanation. That is just as if you were to say, there isn't a last house on this road. One can always build an additional one. Well, you can, generally, right? Whether the word number is necessary in an ostensive definition of two depends on whether, without this word, the other person takes the definition otherwise than I wish. And this is the point. That's the point, right? Like, the system does not need to be perfect. You can point to the cracks in the wall of your house, and if it does its job to shelter you and keep you warm in winter and defend you from intruders, stop fucking complaining about the crack in the wall. Like, it's good enough. 30. We're on 30. We slowed down there. We got on a lot of sidetracks, going for over 2 hours. So one could say an ostensive definition explains the use, the meaning of a word, if the role of the word is supposed to play in the language is already clear. Well, that's self-defeating, right? Oh, did somebody just... Well, now, see, you put the Beatles in my head now. Unprofessional nihilist. We are reading Philosophical Investigations, Ludwig, Wittgenstein. And Lexi is spreading the virus of Sugar Ray, which, we talk about language viruses and musical language viruses. Adding music to the language just makes it more contagious, right? Okay. So whether the word number is necessary in an ostensive definition of two depends on whether, without this word, the other person takes the definition otherwise than I wish. And that will depend on the circumstances under which it's given and on the person I give it to. So don't get hung up on the possibilities of misunderstandings. Don't point at the cracks in the wall, or point at the cracks in the wall if you want, but live in the house. All right. (31) When one shows someone the king in chess and says, "This is the king," stomach's acting up, one does not thereby explain to him the use of this piece, unless he already knows the rules of the game, except for this last point, the shape of the king. That'd be a weird way to learn chess. One can imagine his having learnt the rules of the game without ever having been shown an actual piece. The shape of the chess piece corresponds here to the sound or shape of a word. However, one can also imagine someone's having learnt the game without ever learning or formulating rules. He might have learnt simple board games first by watching and have progressed to more and more complicated ones. He too might be given the explanation, this is the king, if, for instance, he were being shown chess pieces of a shape unfamiliar to him. This explanation again informs him of the use of the piece only because, as we might say, the place for it was already prepared. So there was a king-shaped hole. We filled the king-shaped hole. In other words, we'll say that it informs him of the use only if the place is already prepared. And in that case, it's so. Not because the person to whom we give the explanation already knows rules, but because in another sense, he's already mastered a game and can apply the similar rules and the idea of rules across them. And that's true, like if we're being really literal, right? That's very true of board gaming in general. If you're new to tabletop gaming or board gaming, that first game can be pretty difficult to get your head around. So you stick with the fantasy flight games and the games where everything is determined by a die roll. And then you build upon that, right? And you have this sort of common understanding or language, right, in your head of how board games work, and you can build upon it until you can enjoy more and more complex games. This shit's chess. It ain't checkers. Okay. Consider this further case. I'm explaining chess to someone, and I begin by pointing to a chess piece and saying, this is the king. It can move in this way, and so on. Man, I've been playing so much chess lately, by the way. Wait. What was the subtle burn? Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with this. Well, the problem here is that you were playing second edition. Copiates. First edition or nothing. Thaco or death. No, I'm not accepting a challenge to play chess. If someone challenges me to play chess, I already know they're going to beat me because they did the challenging. Come on. Oh, the burn on Fantasy Flight Game. Well, it's true though, man. You know it. You know that's true. I mean, they can be very elaborate and they can have some really pretty artwork and stuff, but they generally just come down to chance. Doesn't seem to be a lot of strategy in Fantasy Flight Games. Maybe I'm wrong now. A few years ago, that seemed to be the case. Okay, so you're explaining chess to someone. You begin by pointing a chess piece. And this is the king. They move in this way. In this case, we shall say the words, this is the king, or this is called the king. It's an explanation of a word, only if the learner already knows what a piece in a game is. That is, if, for example, he's already played other games, right? Or has watched with understanding how other people play and similar things. Only then will he, while learning the game, be able to ask relevantly, what is this called? That is, this chess piece. We may say it only makes sense for someone to ask what something is called if he already knows how to make use of the name. And this goes back exactly to what you just said. Anna, you can explain the system with the system. Just means the how comes before the why. Right. Again, I'm going to highlight that because I feel like that is... It makes sense for someone to ask what something is called if he already knows how to make use of the name. We can, after all, imagine the person who was asked replying, decide what to call it yourself. And now the one who asked would himself be answerable for everything. You're a dick. 32. Someone coming into a foreign country will sometimes learn the language of the inhabitants from ostensive explanations that they give him. And he will often have to guess how to interpret these explanations. Sometimes we'll guess right, sometimes we'll guess wrong. This is certainly like my understanding of what I know of Spanish was learned in this way. And I will sometimes apply a word because I was, I learned it through example. I will apply a word somewhere and it will be completely wrong and or insulting. So it's dangerous. And now I think we can say Augustine describes the learning of human language as if the child came into a foreign country and did not understand the language of the country. That is, as if he already had a language, just not this one. Or again, as if the child could already think, only not yet speak. And think would here mean something like talk to himself. That's also an interesting point, right? Because before language, who doesn't have an inner monologue? I would guess everybody here has an inner monologue. Possibly like going all the time. I actually want to mark this page. So before we had language, how did that work? Right? I talk to myself in words all the time. But am I having the thoughts and then I've so naturally put them into words that it just kind of happens, and then my brain feels like, okay, well, what I'm experiencing are the words and me talking to myself. But if I didn't have the words, I would still have the thoughts. And yet there are definitely thoughts that I have that are a direct result of the exact words and interplay of language that I use. That's another, I don't think I'm unique in this in any way, but part of that kind of childhood dyslexia kind of, now I see it as like not a superpower, but it's a power to be able to kind of see things backwards and forwards. I don't read books. It's also interesting when they were talking about like a sentence, you can essentially like take all the words and squish them into one word. When I read books, I don't read left to right across a line. I just read line. Like my eyes basically just go down. They don't go, unless it's a really big, physically big book, right? So I read lines. Like I will look at a line of a book, and I feel like probably most people do this, right? And there's a reason why there's sort of a standardized length for most books anyway, right? You can, with both eyes, take in an entire line all at once without having to do this, right? So that's the way that I read, is just kind of going down, right? And I don't really, and that, I don't know what came first. I don't know if the ability to do that came first, if the ability to not really directionally read words or to see words backwards came from doing that. I have no idea. No idea where it came from. I do know that if I did not know a written language, and this is why I'm sure, and I've heard this many, many times before, right? Like culture is partially defined by language because language partially informs the way people think. Kind of like what was being, I think it was QWERTY, you were pointing out before, right? Like the fact that Westerners are more inclined to use language that drives towards decision, and Eastern languages might be much more open in that way. Maybe. And so I'd probably be a different person. We would all probably be different people. Anna, you watched something that said writing was first only meant to be read aloud before punctuation. You mean it wasn't? I don't understand that. First only meant to be read aloud. Oh, not as in like not silently in your head. Okay. Yeah, I think this is all right. Noah, thank you for coming by. I've found this. I thought this was not going to be. I thought this was going to be a big flop, but I'm actually finding this extremely interesting. Well, yeah. Yes, Court. Yeah, but this has been referred to like multiple times. That's still part of the language game. Emma. Interesting. That's fascinating. I didn't know that. So strange. Huh. Okay, well, I mean, I think like we can at least draw the conclusion that the structure of language, I mean, it's probably a two-way system, right? Like the structure of the language that you know and have your inner monologue with, or even if you don't have an inner monologue, right, affects the way you think, and the way you think, the way we all think, affects language as well. No, I just see the words green meadow. I mean, if I have to put forth effort. Well, that makes total sense. Like, I guess now that I think about it more, before there was sort of mass production of books, the most effective way for people to hear things that were written would be for them to be read aloud. So, you know, there's only one copy of this scroll in the Library of Alexandria, and let's have a little circle. Let's sit down and, you know, 8 or 9 of us can hear it. Whereas that selfish, well, who's that selfish asshole, Animaxer, or what was it? I'm forgetting the name of the guy who, let's say Animaxer, sitting in the corner there, reading a scroll, all to himself. Selfish prick. How dare he not read it aloud? Democritus of Abdera. That's who I was thinking of. Nothing like Animaxer. Animaxer's the guy who, isn't he the guy who determined that the Earth was round by literally running, like measuring out the distance between 2 cities and seeing the sun went down a well on the equinox. And you could see the reflection of the sun on that one day only at that one time. And then measured the shadow of an obelisk 1,000 miles away and managed to actually determine the radius of the Earth just by those 2 things and basic geometry. Insane. But what if someone objected? 33. But what if someone objected? I'm starting to not be able to. Well, this makes sense to you because if you've seen Greek statues, Eratosthenes. Well, no, Democritus was the first person I was thinking of. Anaxagoras is not. You're right. I'm thinking of Eratosthenes. You're right. But this makes total sense that the Greeks describe color by lightness and not by hue. If you've seen the restoration of Greek statues back to all their full color glory, and they just look terrible. Rococo doesn't begin to cover it. But what if someone objected, it's not true that one must already be a master of a language game in order to understand an ostensive definition? Rather, one need only obviously know or guess what the person given the explanation is pointing at. But then that's just like a very clear just association, right? That is, whether, for example, at the shape of the object or its color or the number and so on. So, okay, so like, am I referring to the shape or the color when I point at this and say Blurgschmert, right? If you have no other context for that, my guess would be like if you had no other context for that, you would think I was referring to this thing. Maybe the class of beings that are this thing. Maybe the name of this particular thing. I wouldn't think you were thinking the color. Right. So what does pointing at the shape, pointing at the color consist of? Point at a piece of paper. Okay. Let's take a piece of paper from good old Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights journal. Let's rip out a piece of paper that has something particularly arrogant on it. Okay, this is annoying. I'll rip this one out. Little blurb from Matthew, who himself was, was a philosopher. One in a row. And he does write that as one word. One in a row. On in a row. 09 a row. You can pronounce it any of those ways. Any success takes one in a row. Do one thing well, then another. Once, then once more. I should have been doing this in his voice. Any success takes one in a row. Do one thing well, then another. Once, and once more. Over and over again until the end. Then it's one in a row again. Beautiful. Okay, so let's do what it's saying. Oops, went back a page. Point at a piece of paper, and now point at its shape, and now point at its color, and now at its number. How did you do it? You'll say that you meant something different each time you pointed, and if I ask how that's done, you'll say you concentrated your attention on the color, the shape, so on. But now I ask again, how is that done? All right. Suppose someone points to a vase and says, look at that marvelous blue. Forget about the shape. Or, look at the marvelous shape. The color doesn't matter. No doubt you'll do something different in each case when you do what he asks you. But do you always do the same thing when you direct your attention to the color? Imagine various different cases to indicate a few. Is this blue the same as the blue over there? Do you see any difference? You're mixing paints and you say, it's hard to get the blue of the sky. It's turning fine. You can already see blue sky again. Note how different these two blues look. Do you see the blue book over there? Bring it here. This blue light means, what is this blue called? Is it indigo? It's a shame indigo is not here to hear her name called out. I don't think that he does. I don't think that he does. I mean, especially given what mid 20th century, late 19th century, like mathematicians were gods, right? Like if you were, even physics was considered like subservient to math. Okay, so one attends the color sometimes by blocking the contour from view with one's hand. Okay, or by not focusing on the contour of the thing, or by staring. These are all like just different ways of using the language game to express your meaning. One attends to the shape, sometimes by tracing it, sometimes by screwing up one's eyes so as not to see the color clearly. That doesn't work. And so forth. I want to say, this and similar things are what one does while one directs one's attention to this or that. But it isn't only these things that make us say that someone is attending to the shape, the color, etc. Just as making a move in chess doesn't consist only in pushing a piece from here to there on the board, nor yet in the thoughts and feelings that accompany the move, but in the circumstances that we call playing a game of chess, solving a chess problem, and the like. By the way, what is my ChessCom rating right now? I'm on airplane mode. No puedo. Okay. "34. But suppose someone said, I always do the same thing when I attend to a shape. I follow the contour with my eyes and feel. And suppose this person gives someone else the ostensive explanation. That is called a circle, pointing to a circular object. I'm making it more of an oval. And having all these experiences, can't his hearer still interpret the explanation differently, even though he sees with the other's eyes following the contour? So if I go, circle. And even though he feels what the other feels. That is to say, this interpretation may also consist in how he makes use of the explained word. In what he points at, for example, when told, point to a circle. For neither the expression to mean the explanation in such and such a way, nor the expression to interpret the explanation in such and such a way, signifies a process which accompanies the giving and hearing of an explanation. Going good. There are indeed what may be called characteristic experiences of pointing to the shape. For example, following the contour with one's finger, or with one eye as one points. We just covered that. This, however, does not happen in all cases in which I mean the shape, and no more does any other one characteristic process occur in all of these cases. How can you really look at the color, right? But even if something of this sort did recur in all cases, it would still depend on the circumstances, that is, on what happened before and after the pointing, whether we say he pointed at the shape and not the color. For the words to point at the shape, to mean the shape, and so on, are not used in the same way as these. To point at this book, not that one. To point at the chair, not at the table, and so on. Just think how differently we learn the use of the words to point at this thing, to point at that thing, and on the other hand, to point at the color, not the shape, to mean the color, so on. To repeat, in certain cases, especially when one points at the shape or at the number, there are characteristic experiences and ways of pointing. Characteristic because they recur often, not always, when shape or number are meant. So maybe, number, shape. But do you know of an experience characteristic of pointing at a piece in a game as a piece in a game? Okay, so this is where it all kind of falls apart. All the same, one can say, I mean that this piece is called the king, not this particular bit of wood that I'm pointing at. Recognizing, wishing, remembering, and so on. Give my voice a break for a second. Starting to lose it. Count my money. Oh, shit. What else do I have here? All right, just go back to this. Oh my God. It's terrible. That's terrible. What have I done? I have to cough. Quick, mute. All right. So what is going on when one means the words, that is blue, at one time as a statement about the object one is pointing at another as an explanation of, of the word blue, while in the second case, one really means that is called blue? Then can one at one time mean the word is as is called, and the word blue as blue, and at another time mean is really as is? Okay. So to me, this is like getting a little into the semantics, but like I said, I feel like this is setting a foundation for something. For the higher level, more complicated rules of the language game, we need this simple alignment. It can also happen that from what was meant as a piece of information, someone derives an explanation of a word. Here lurks a superstition of great consequence. Oh. It can also happen that from what was meant as a piece of information, someone derives an explanation of a word. How many people have died over misunderstandings? Who knows? Can I say boo 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 and mean if it doesn't rain, I shall go for a walk? It's only in a language that I can mean something by something. This shows clearly that the grammar of to mean does not resemble that of the expression of to imagine and the like. Okay. All right. Okay. So meaning something. So there's a distinction there that seems to be like being drawn between meaning something and imagining something. Well, so I mean, I don't know if boo boo boo, I mean, you just meant that to be a nonsense word, right? But I guess to me, like what I'm getting from that is it automatically sort of becomes language if my intent when I say that, like as a child or as a baby, right? If I'm saying babies make consonant sounds because it feels neat. But they also, and like my son had this, right? Where he had some difficulty with enunciation early in his life. And in his head, he would hear it perfectly. Like he would hear what he meant perfectly. And he would get very frustrated with other people when they would not understand what he was saying, because he did not realize that he was not speaking clearly, which that also like kind of speaks to a different kind of cognitive dissonance there. I'm certain that, for instance, okay, this was near the tail end, so this was not the kind of difficulty I was talking about, but his sister used to always ask him to say the word bridge, and he would say bitch, and because that's the way that he said it. But the thing is, he could not grasp that he was saying it incorrectly, right? It wasn't like he would say bitch and then be like, oh, I said it wrong. No, he was convinced that he said bridge. So where's the dissonance there? I mean, he heard the word bridge, like, and obviously he says it right now. Right? So he heard the word, but for some reason, when he said it, he felt like something in his brain made him feel like saying bitch was the same as saying bridge. His sister loved it. She was getting him to say it all the damn time. And he wasn't, I mean, apart from when there was laughing going on, right? Like he wasn't aware that he was mispronouncing it. So, it's interesting. In his head, he was probably saying bridge. And somehow that feedback loop didn't work. That's a good one too, Anna. Oh, this is interesting too. So I know that this can happen. But I feel like I have to say, I don't think it happened with Hans Niemann. I just don't. I just think that guy's full of shit. So this is very much like Hans Niemann's explanation for why he sort of seemed to acquire a vaguely Eastern European accent. Well, sigh all you want. Whereas a few years ago, he just talked like any kid from, the Bible Belt, essentially. Well, no, not any kid from California or the East Coast, the Upper East Coast. He just talked like an American kid. He's a persona. He is a cheating persona, and he lost. He is now lost. No, that's never going to happen. They're never going to be able to figure that out unless someone comes forward. But whatever, his play is good, right? It's not at the level where he would, take out Magnus Carlsen the way that he did, and then not have anything to say about it. Of course, he's gotten better, and he's obviously a skilled grandmaster. I don't know. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with that lawsuit. I'm not sure who you're referring to here, Osama. Hi, Amogus. Yeah, if the murder weapon was an icicle. All right, so 3 hours. I feel like 3 hours is pretty good. Could your son identify the pronunciation? Oh, interesting, Apollo. I am sure that he could and did. Now, I didn't actually test this, but I'm going by the fact, like this is when he was really little, right? But he hated hearing his own voice. And when I would play back like his voice to him, he would not want to hear it. So I definitely think when he heard the way he was speaking on a recording, he recognized it. But when he was saying it, he didn't think that he was saying it. And I guess that makes sense. You know, we all think that we sound different on recordings than we actually do. So let's get a summation of basically what we learned here. Things mean things, and language is inherently limited, but seems to be able to generally get the job done. But what's really going on, like in our brains, when we think about the language game? Did you say this, Anna, just to like set me off on something? I have. That's like a trigger for me, right? That's the would you kindly. Well, really, it's that or Jordan Peterson, right? Elon Musk, he's saving the world. Let's just say, like, yeah. Let's just name villains. Snake oil salesman, billionaire, man, children. I love it. I listen to my videos over and over again. And I think, oh my gosh, how velvety. Especially like the nasal quality. Like I can feel it when I'm talking. There's something going on in my nasal cavity when I talk. And I can hear it when I listen back to my voice, and I can feel it when I'm doing it. And it is annoying. Corridimus. That's perfect. What's strange is he is he's seems to be pretty soft spoken, and doesn't, from what I've seen, like doesn't go on long tangents. You know, in spoken, he'll write a hell of a lot of them. Right now, I don't know how many tweets he's written today, but I'm sure it's, you know. He said something stupid today. All right, I hope that you all have a good rest of your Friday night. Oh, Nasha, I've had the MRIs. I do have chronic post-nasal drip. The back of my soft palate does not fully close against the upper walls of my throat. I have a thinning. I have upper canal dehiscence, a thinning of the skull bone above my ear canals, which causes vertigo. Oh boy. I don't know what's going on here, Emma. Yeah, I enjoyed this too. But I want to end on 3 hours on the dot. So see y'all later.